The vast, indifferent landscape of Wyoming stretched out before Sarah Vance, a seemingly endless canvas of sun-baked earth and sagebrush. The ranch, once a hub of bustling activity under her late husband Jacob, now felt like a silent mausoleum. It had been a year since he'd been thrown from his horse, and his neck had snapped clean. A year of quiet grief, of managing the ranch with a heavy heart, and of feeling the hollow space beside her in their bed grow larger with each passing night. She was a woman hardened by the land, but softened by a deep, unspoken sorrow. Lately, though, a strange, almost imperceptible curiosity had begun to stir her from her apathy. Small things were happening. A few biscuits, left to cool on the windowsill, would vanish overnight, leaving behind only a few scattered crumbs. The milk pail, kept outside the kitchen door, was tipped, but the milk was gone, not spilled. Jacob's old horse, Mercy, a gentle roan mare, would often stand by the barn at sunset, whinnying a soft, almost mournful tune into the twilight. Her instincts, honed by a lifetime on the frontier, told her it wasn't a coyote or a wandering dog. It was something smaller, more clever, and far more human. One particularly cold night, the wind howled a lonely tune, and Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the fire in the hearth a flickering comfort against the encroaching darkness. A shotgun rested on her lap, more for the ritual of her late husband's protection than any real threat. As the moon rose, a pale, cold sliver, she saw it. A tiny figure, no bigger than a small shadow, slipped out from behind the hay bales. It was a boy, no more than a wisp of a child. He moved with a practiced, silent grace that spoke of survival, his clothes a patchwork of tattered rags, his face smudged with dirt. He was a ghost, a living remnant of some forgotten tragedy. She watched as he crept to the water trough, drinking deeply, his small body shivering. He then moved toward the kitchen window, his wide, hungry eyes fixed on the warmth and light within. A pang of raw maternal instinct hit Sarah with a force that took her breath away. He wasn't a threat, he was a child, starving and alone. She quietly rose, placing the shotgun on the mantel. She took a loaf of bread, a hunk of cheese, and a bottle of milk, wrapping them in a piece of clean cloth. She walked out to the trough, feigning a chore, and placed the bundle where he had just drunk. When she turned her back, he snatched the bundle and vanished into the night as silently as he had appeared. The next morning, the bundle was gone, and the heavy ache in her heart felt a little lighter. She had a new purpose. The act of leaving food for the boy became a nightly ritual, a quiet, almost sacred covenant between two lonely souls. Sarah would prepare a simple, nourishing meal. Cornbread, a few strips of dried beef, perhaps a crisp apple if she had one, and leave it in the water trough. She never saw him take it. He was a phantom, a whisper on the wind. But the empty cloth each morning was her unwavering proof. In her mind, she gave him a name, Barnaby. A name that felt solid and kind, the opposite of his fleeting existence. The Cowboys on her ranch, Dusty, a lanky, grizzled old-timer with a heart of gold, and Jeb, a younger, more eager hand, noticed nothing. They were focused on the cattle, the endless mending of fences, and the grinding physical work of the ranch. But Sarah's world had narrowed to this new, secret purpose, the care of this lost child. The nightly delivery of food was a ritual that brought a quiet sense of hope back into her life. One afternoon, a harsh wind whipped across the plains, bringing with it a stinging, bone-chilling rain. Sarah's concern for the boy turned into a gnawing anxiety. Was he warm? Was he dry? She imagined him huddled in some cold, miserable corner of the barn, soaked to the bone. She felt a sharp pang of guilt that she hadn't tried to bring him inside. But fear and the unwritten, cautious code of the frontier held her back. A strange boy could bring trouble. He could be a runaway, an orphan of a violent family, or a carrier of some unseen disease. Still, a dormant mother's instinct, once buried with Jacob, was stirring with a ferocious strength. That night, she waited longer than usual. The rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf. She finally saw him. He was a small, shivering knot of misery. He barely had the strength to take the food she left. He was soaked to the bone, and his body shook violently. He was a child on the brink, and Sarah's heart broke for him. She knew with a terrible certainty that she couldn't continue this way. The cold would kill him. He was a child, not a wild animal. The risk of him being discovered by her hands, or worse, by some drifter passing through, was growing with each passing day. She had to do something more. The next day was cold and unforgiving, a leaden sky casting a grey blanket over the land. The air was still and sharp, and the threat of a frost hung in the air. Sarah spent the afternoon in her kitchen, the warm, yeasty smell of baking bread filling the small room. She also prepared a thick, hearty stew with carrots, potatoes, and a few precious pieces of venison. It was a meal that was more a comfort than a necessity for her, but she was preparing it for him. This time there would be no stealth, no anonymous gift. She was ready to take a leap of faith. When night fell, she left the kitchen door slightly ajar. She sat in a rocking chair by the fire, a worn Bible resting on her lap, her ears strained for the slightest sound. An hour passed, then 2. The fire crackled, the only sound in the house. She began to think he wouldn't come, that the rain had driven him away permanently. Just as she was about to give up, she heard it. A soft creak of the door. The tiny shadow slipped inside, his movements a symphony of caution. He was a ghost in the dim firelight, his eyes wide and fixed on the steaming pot of stew on the table. Sarah spoke softly, her voice a gentle, calming presence in the silent room. "It's all right, son. You're safe here." The boy froze, a frightened animal caught in a trap. His small, gaunt face was a mask of terror, his eyes darting toward the door as if to flee. He didn't speak a word. Sarah didn't move. She simply gestured to the table, a silent invitation. "Eat. You're half frozen." Slowly, his eyes darting from her face to the food and back again, he approached the table. He ate with the fierce urgency of the truly starving, his hands shaking as he held the bowl. The warmth of the stew seemed to fill him, and he closed his eyes for a moment in pure relief. He ate every last drop, then looked up at her, his eyes full of a mixture of profound fear and something else, a fragile, overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, his voice thin and raspy from disuse. It was the first time she had heard his voice. It was the most beautiful sound she had heard in a year. The boy's name was Caleb. He was 8 years old. He told her his story in halting, hesitant sentences that night, the words tumbling out as if from a forgotten well. His parents had been part of a small wagon train heading west, but a flash flood had swept them away, along with the rest of their party. He was the sole survivor, a miracle that felt more like a curse. He had been alone for months, surviving on scraps, the rare kindness of strangers, and his own sheer will to live. He had been a wild thing, afraid of human touch, but now, in the warmth of the fire, he was beginning to thaw. Sarah gave him a bed in a small, unused room off the kitchen. She gave him new clothes, clean and warm, and a basin of hot water to wash away the months of grime. The simple acts of care, a hot meal, a warm bed, a clean shirt, began to bring him back from the edge. Slowly, the color returned to his cheeks and the light to his eyes. He began to help her with chores, chopping firewood with a small axe and fetching water from the well. He was a natural with animals, and the horses seemed to trust him instantly, his gentle hands a testament to his kind heart. He didn't speak much, but his presence filled the house with a gentle humming energy. Jeb and Dusty, the Cowboys, began to notice the change in Sarah. "Sarah, you're looking a mite better," Dusty said one morning, a squint in his eye as he took in her lighter spirit. "Got a good cook, did you?" Sarah just smiled. Something like that. She hadn't told them about Caleb. Not yet. The secret felt like a fragile, precious thing, a delicate bird in her hands. She was fiercely protective of him, and the thought of anyone taking him away was a fear that kept her up at night. The world of the Old West was unforgiving, and an orphan, without kin or papers, was little more than a potential burden to some, a liability to others. She was determined to be his only kin. The secret couldn't last forever. The small, isolated world of the ranch was about to collide with the social fabric of the nearby town of Dry Gulch. One afternoon, while Sarah and Caleb were in town for supplies, the boy, who had been hiding in the back of the wagon under a blanket, peered out. A local cowboy, a loud-mouthed, vindictive man named Silas, saw him. He was a man who lived to gossip, and he saw a juicy morsel in the small, unfamiliar boy. "Well, looky here, boys," Silas said, tipping his hat back, a smirk on his face. "Sarah Vance got herself a new hand, a little one at that." Sarah's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She tried to deflect him, but Silas was persistent, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Where'd he come from, Sarah? He ain't one of yours." "He's a distant cousin," Sarah said, the lie feeling thin and brittle on her tongue. "Fell on hard times. Needs a home." Silas's smirk widened into a knowing sneer. "Funny. Don't recall Jacob ever having a cousin this far north, and he looks like a wild thing. Got no manners." The conversation was short, but the damage was done. The rumor had been planted. Whispers followed them all the way to the general store and back to the ranch. Sarah knew the story would spread like a prairie fire, fueled by boredom and suspicion. The cowboys in the saloons would talk, and soon everyone would know. That night, she sat with Caleb by the fire. "Some folks might ask questions," she said, her voice serious and low. "They might not understand, but you have a home here now, Caleb. Understand?" He nodded, his small hand reaching out and grasping hers. "I know, ma'am. Thank you." His trust was a heavy burden, a weight of responsibility she had never asked for, but was now determined to carry. The whispers, carried on the dusty winds, turned into rumors, and the rumors turned sour. In a world where every man and his livestock were counted, an unknown child was an anomaly, a source of suspicion and unease. Sarah began to feel the shift. The neighboring ranchers were less friendly, their greetings shorter. Some would ride by her fence without a wave, their eyes full of hard, cold judgment. Silas, with his venomous tongue, began to suggest that Sarah had somehow bought the boy, or worse, that she was hiding something dark about his past. He claimed the boy was a runaway from a gang of outlaws, or that he was a bad omen for the land, a Jonah who would bring ruin to the crops and the cattle. One evening, Dusty and Jeb approached her, their faces grim. "Sarah," Dusty said, his voice hesitant, "folks in town are talking. They're saying the boy's bad luck, that you ought to send him on his way." Sarah's jaw set in a hard, resolute line. "He's not bad luck. He's a child, a boy who needs a home." "It ain't just that," Jeb said, looking down at his worn boots. "They're saying he's a Jonah, that if he stays, something bad's gonna happen to the ranch. They're talking about taking him." The words hit her like a physical blow. The unspoken threat of violence was clear. Sarah had faced down wolves, blizzards, and the soul-crushing weight of grief, but this was different. This was the dark, superstitious, and fear-driven heart of humanity, and it scared her more than anything. The thought of them, a posse of armed men, coming for the boy she had risked so much to save, was a terror she couldn't shake. She knew she had to prepare for the worst. She checked her rifle, polished the barrel, and made sure she had a full box of ammunition. She would not go down without a fight. The morning was perfect, a cloudless blue sky, but the air felt heavy with foreboding. The silence of the ranch was an anxious, tense thing. Sarah saw them first, a cloud of dust on the horizon, moving steadily and with grim purpose toward her ranch, dozens of them. She counted a dozen, then two, then lost count. It was a mass of men on horseback, a silent, grim river of steel and leather, all heading for her gate. Caleb, who was feeding the chickens, saw them too. He dropped the feed bag, and his face went white with terror. He knew what this meant. He knew the look in men's eyes who were coming for a reckoning. Sarah put a firm hand on his shoulder. "Go inside, Caleb. Go to your room and stay there. Don't make a sound. Whatever happens, you stay quiet." She walked to the gate, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her ears. She stood with her feet planted firmly on the dusty ground, her chin held high, a figure of defiant strength. The leader of the group was Silas, a smug, triumphant look on his face. Behind him were the faces of neighbors she had known for years, men who had shared a drink with Jacob, who had helped with branding, who now looked at her with suspicion and hard judgment. "Morning, Sarah," Silas said, his voice full of mock civility. "We've come for the boy." His eyes were cold and hard. "He's not an animal for you to take," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong despite the fear that shook her. "He's my ward. He's under my protection." "He's a public menace," one of the men shouted from the back, his voice thick with a superstitious fear. "A curse on this land. You know the law, Sarah. An orphan without kin can be taken by the county." "The nearest county office is 3 days' ride," Sarah shot back, her voice rising with righteous anger. "And you have no right to come onto my land like this? Not for this." The standoff was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. The cowboys shifted in their saddles, their hands resting on the butts of their pistols. Sarah felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. She was one woman against dozens of armed men who had come with a singular purpose. She thought of Caleb, hiding in the house, a small, terrified boy who had already lost so much. She wouldn't let them take him. She just wouldn't. She would stand her ground no matter the cost. "There's no need for this to get ugly, Sarah," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, a veiled threat in his tone. "Just hand the boy over. We'll take him to the orphanage. It's for the best." "There is no orphanage in these parts," Sarah said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury, "and you know it. You'll put him to work on some ranch until he breaks. I won't allow it. He's staying here." She looked at the faces in the crowd, the men she had known since she was a girl. She saw their fear, their superstition, their stubborn refusal to see the truth. Just as Silas was about to make a move, a voice cut through the tension, clear and full of a quiet authority. "Silas, what are you doing?" Dusty rode up, his old face a thundercloud of disapproval. Jeb was right behind him, his younger face a mask of determination. "This ain't right," Dusty said. "You're all acting like a bunch of fools. You're coming after a woman and a boy. It's a damn shame." Silas scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. "Stay out of this, Dusty. This is ranch business." "This ain't ranch business," Dusty said, his hand on his own pistol, his gaze fixed on Silas. "This is bullying. And Sarah's a good woman. She helped me when my leg was broke. She helped half of you when you needed it. And now you're going to turn on her for doing a good deed." Jeb spoke up, his voice less commanding but no less firm. "The boy ain't cursed. He's just a kid. I've seen him. He helps with the chores. He's a good little worker." The unexpected, unified defense from Sarah's own men was a shock to the mob. The cowboys looked at each other, their collective resolve beginning to fray. They respected Dusty. He was an honest man, a man of his word, and his quiet defense of Sarah was unexpected and powerful. A few of the men began to look uncomfortable, their bravado and sense of righteous mission faltering in the face of logic and decency. The mob mentality was starting to break. "We just want to make sure he's not trouble," one of them said, a bit defensively. "He ain't," Jeb said. "I've seen him. He's just a quiet boy, lost his family. It's a sad thing." Dusty's voice was low and commanding. "Jacob Vance was a good man. He'd be ashamed of this. You're trying to take a boy from his widow. What kind of men does that make you?" The question hung in the air, a rebuke that hit its mark. The Cowboys, for all their rough edges, were men who lived by a code of honor, however unwritten it might be. The thought of confronting a grieving widow and an old man over a child suddenly seemed not brave, but cowardly, dishonorable. Slowly, one by one, the Cowboys began to lower their rifles. A few of them muttered apologies and began to turn their horses around. The grim river of men began to break apart, the tension dissipating into the morning air. Silas, defeated and angry, gave Sarah one last, venomous look. "This ain't over," he snarled, before turning his horse and riding off. But the power was gone from his words. The mob had disbanded. Sarah watched them ride away, her legs shaking with exhaustion and relief. The dust settled again, and Sarah was left standing at the gate, her heart still pounding with the adrenaline of the confrontation. Dusty and Jeb rode up to her, their faces filled with relief and a newfound respect. "They won't be back," Dusty said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "You stood your ground, Sarah. That's a brave thing." Sarah didn't feel brave. She felt utterly exhausted. But then the kitchen door creaked open, and Caleb's small head poked out. Seeing her, he ran out, his small arms wrapping around her waist. He didn't say anything, but he held on tightly, his small body shaking with quiet sobs. She knelt down and hugged him back, holding him close. He was no longer a shadow. He was a boy, solid and real, and he was hers. The confrontation had changed things, not just for them, but for the entire community. The other ranchers, ashamed of their actions, began to send over gifts in the following weeks. A sack of flour, a side of bacon, a new bridle for one of the horses. The attempted act of intimidation had backfired, and it had proven Sarah's resilience and her fierce love for the boy. Dusty and Jeb stayed. They worked the ranch, not just for a wage, but out of loyalty to a woman they now saw as a leader, a moral force in a harsh world. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Caleb helped with the chores, his skills growing with each passing day. He learned to ride a horse and shoot a rifle. Sarah taught him to read and write, and in the quiet evenings they would read from the Bible by the firelight, the words a gentle balm to their weary souls. They were a family, forged not by blood, but by kindness, courage, and a shared understanding of what it meant to be alone and to find a home. And every night, as the sun set, Sarah would stand on her porch and watch the twilight, no longer feeling the silence of a lonely widow, but the quiet, deep comfort of a mother who had found her purpose in a lost boy, and in doing so, had found herself.